What's your first experience with the comic book? A lot of people have it handed down from an older brother at the Five and Dime, or they saw a TV show. Do you guys have a specific memory of what got you into comics?
Yeah, definitely my formative comic book experience was, I was at a friend's house. I was like 9 years old. I grew up without a television, so I didn't even see any comics or TV or movies or anything. But I was at this friend's house, and I saw an issue of Daredevil from the Frank Miller, Klaus Janson era. It was the one with the Punisher on the front shooting Daredevil. It was like
Okay.
182, something like that. And I was about 9 years old, so I was fascinated by it. But I started looking at it, and it was like this guy dressed as a devil, and this guy with a skull on his chest shooting criminals and drug dealers. And it was pretty far out for me. It had like a really visceral effect on me. I'd heard of like Super Friends and cartoons and stuff like this, but this book wasn't like that. And it was so powerful when I read it that I think it was so bigger than the world I was used to. And I happened to come back to it a couple years later. I was in a secondhand store and found like the exact next issue sitting in the store for no reason at all. And I picked it up and I was maybe like 12 or 13. And I read it then. I think I was like I was able to process it a little bit more. And when I opened up and read it, I felt like there's such an intelligence behind the design of the story. That's why it had such a visceral effect on me. And I became aware of how like the shadows and the lighting and the panel pacing and the panel structure and the shapes of the panel, everything like Frank Miller and Klaus Janson were putting into the story was really designed to give you an atmosphere and a feel of the story that I couldn't articulate when I looked at it when I was 9. But now I can see it. I was so fascinated by it. So then I got more of those Daredevil issues, and I looked up those guys as much as I could. This is pre-internet, so as much as I could find, I found like interviews of Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. They talked about how Miller was inspired by Will Eisner and comics and sequential art. So I looked up that book and ordered it from the publisher. I got that. Just became so. Yeah, can you hear me better now? Oh, sorry about that. I don't know. Okay,
Start all over.
Wow. Sure. I started with this Frank Miller, Klaus Janson Daredevil comic book, and when I was very young, and it was very inspiring to me, and I was very inspired by how they used the language of the comic book to tell the story so effectively, and that's kind of what really got me into looking for comics and reading them as enjoyment, but also gave me the idea of using this as a communication form to tell stories.
Go for you.
I had been aware, like I used to go to this candy store that sold comics, and I remember I'd buy like a couple of comics. I was young, I was about like 5 or 6 years old, and I had this cousin that was older, and he was an artist, and he would draw Spider-Man, and I'd be like, wow, that looks just like the comic. Can you teach me? I had kind of a man crush on my cousin. I don't know. I thought he was so cool. And I remember he lived in Massachusetts. I was in New York, and I remember visiting him. And even though I had seen comics and he collected as well, there was one weekend I'll never forget it. I saw Long Shot #2 by Arthur Adams. It has Long Shot on the cover with the girl flying. Alpha Flight #12 by John Byrne, where a Guardian blows up in that sequence with the numbered panels. And he showed me Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein. And Teen Titans by George Perez. It was the issue with Trigon. And I was like, that was probably the weekend where I was like, I want to draw like these guys. Like, it blew my mind. And my cousin was all like, look how none of the lines cross on Bernie Wrightson. I mean, he was like pointing out, like, George Perez draws like every single leaf on this tree. How long did that take? And I think it like left an impression on me, because up until then I drew like Bugs Bunny and like Winnie the Pooh and stuff. I still draw Winnie the Pooh sometimes. But that's the kind of stuff I was into, and then when I saw this, I was like, I mean, from then on I made my own crap comics that weren't good. And then, you know, I got an internship at Marvel. Luckily I lived in New York City and they had internships at Marvel in DC, and I met all the editors there, and you know, guys like Mark Texeira would be there working like day and night, and he was so nice. He would be asleep when I came in the morning sometimes, like on the desk. He never went home, but he still took the time to look at my stuff and give me tips. And I think if I didn't have that encouragement at that time, I don't know if I would have kept pursuing it. And then, you know, one day Bob Harris was like, when you graduate high school, we're going to give you a book or something. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he did. It was the Deadpool, 4-issue Deadpool series. And when I look at that stuff now, it's I don't know, it stinks. But, you know, it just, Uncanny X-Men came shortly after, and I was so nervous. I still remember how nervous I was working on that stuff. So, yeah, the rest is history. So.
You were both drawn since you were young, even before comics. You said, you know, Bugs Bunny, Winnie the Pooh. David, yourself as well, or?
Yeah, I always drew things and made things ever since I was a kid. You know?
Yeah, I had no idea you could make money doing it. That's the thing. It's like, I think it's like a kid that picks up a guitar when they're like 5 years old and like they just play. You don't even have a concept that it can be a career at some point. It's just, you just love it. I joke about how I didn't like hang out with girls or play sports or anything. I just drew all the time. I kind of regret that now, but.
Something I experienced in high school was I drew, I painted, I made all this different stuff, and I loved comics. But it wasn't until I was in high school where you start to feel the expectations of the adult world that you have to start to choose something and select something and kind of narrow in on something that you can at least confine into a box or label that maybe you can major in college. And so you start experiencing that pressure from your teachers and other adults, like, you know, what are you going to major in college? And fortunately, I had an art teacher who was really kind, and she said, and I knew I was going to have to put myself through college, so I was trying at every possible thing I could do to figure out how I was going to go to college. And she put together a scholarship submission for me, for an art scholarship, and she said, we're going to send 10 pieces of you. And I've put together the first 9 pieces of different mediums. Here's one oil paint, here's one sculpture, here's photography, here's, you know, all these 10 different things. She goes, for the 10th and final thing, you just do whatever you want. You choose anything you want for that thing. And then I thought, I have all these other mediums. So I love comics, I love storytelling, I love writing. Why don't I try my hand at making my own comic book and use that as my 10th inclusion into the scholarship application? And so I did it, and that's when I felt this incredible feeling of all those interests that I have. I felt like I didn't have to drop one for the other. I felt like any interest that I loved, I could integrate it into the medium of a comic. You know, all the storytelling aspect, the writing, the any kind of artistic visual medium, I could put that right into the story. And it was so fun not to just do one single piece, but to be doing a story that every day when I woke up, I couldn't wait to continue with the pages that I had already begun before. And so I wrote like this 55-page crime comic that I wrote and drew. And I don't know why it's 55 pages. I just did like a page at a time, and it turned out that way. And I showed that to my teacher, and I think just, not that it was necessarily good, but just that there was so much of it, I think impressed her, and they used that for the scholarship application. And I ended up getting some other art scholarships, but one place I got a full scholarship for that package, and so I ended up going to college for that. So, but it was in the process of that book that I go, this is when I was 16 years old, I was putting it together. I started college when I was 17, but when I was 16 doing that book, I thought that's when I went, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. Like, this is everything I want to do, I can do in the form of a comic, and I can make it fit in that medium. And so when I started college, I knew that's already what I'm gonna do, but it's different these days. But in those days, I couldn't find a college that majored in sequential art or comics, or even had classes on that subject. So I just tried to take every class that I had to take, but through the lens of what can I glean from this class and use it to apply into my comic book work and make that richer.
You still have a copy of that 55-page comic?
I still have it, yeah, I would never show anybody, but I still have it, yeah.
Now, you know, looking at the paths your careers have taken, Joe, you starting at Marvel and then kind of moving into the creator-owned comic world, and David, you kind of starting in creator-owned comic and moving into the Marvel world, it's kind of, you know, there's kind of the two divergent paths that cross. But comics aside, comics has taken you both beyond the medium. It was almost a starting platform for both of you. to get into video games, to toy designs, to TV, to fine painting. You were doing some work on Dexter as well. You want to talk about how kind of you've obviously never lost the love of comics because you both keep a foothold in this medium. You want to talk about what it's like, the difference between working in comics and working in games or working in TV?
Yeah, I've loved games like since I was a little kid. Also, that was like my other passion, and so when I had the chance to break into that, it came through the fact that people at video game companies were fans of my comic book work. So you're totally right. Or we would do like Disney tours, and then after the tour, all the Disney artists would be like, "Can you sign my comics?" And I'm like, "What?" Like, oh my God! All I do is watch Disney movies. I couldn't believe that all these guys in all these cool fields that I wanted to get into knew my work. So it definitely has been huge for me. I don't think that I could have just applied like, I want to be a creative director of a video game company. Let me apply for a job. Like I had no credentials or anything other than the fact people knew my work and they were excited to have me on the project. So it's definitely been huge for me. But working on a game, the company I started, Vigil, we started with 4 guys, and before the end, the bitter end, we had about 200 people. We were working on 2 games, and we had meetings all the time, and managers and flying to corporate and talking to people. It was like, all I could think is like, oh my God, I can't wait to be back in my studio drawing. Like when I do comics, it's just me, some music, and that's it. Sometimes I work really late. Sometimes I work in the morning. It's really cool to be able to work when you're the most motivated. It's not like a 9 to 5. Like, oh, I don't want to do this, but I have to. It's just really wonderful. And eventually, I do miss the energy of being in a studio with a lot of other people. But like I said, I've always kind of been a loner and just sitting in my room drawing. So when I do comics, sometimes it just feels really comfortable. It's kind of like I did when I was a kid. So it's like I don't think I can ever leave that. It's just and I make money doing it. It's crazy.
The magic is still there.
I know. It is. It is magic. I do still appreciate it. It hasn't I haven't gotten jaded yet. So
Wonderful.
Yeah, it is magic. It's you take whatever crazy idea you have, and in your basement or your attic or wherever you are in your own little world, you can create a book that has the potential for a very large audience to see. It just comes from you. Unlike movies where there's so many people involved and maybe it's decision by committee, or unlike radio or television where you have to have a license to do it. You don't need to have a license to make comics. That's pretty amazing. It's really sort of like the last pirate medium. Whether you're doing online comics or stapling together at Kinko's, you have the opportunity just for one person to come up with some crazy idea, make it real into a 3-dimensional material world book that other people can find and follow you in. So that's sort of always been sort of the base for me. And from that, it's this incredible idea delivery system that you can do your own book and get it out there. And that's usually where you get all the offers from all the other projects, is because they're familiar with your comic book work. When I started doing Kabuki, which is the book that I write and draw and created when I was in college, I made this. I wanted to do this book, and I made it in college, and I tried to use it I turned it in for my senior thesis in literature, and I ended up turning in for any class. I was probably this very precocious child to a lot of the professors, but I got a BFA in graphic design and a minor in literature, so I would ask my graphic design classes if I could turn in this book to solve some of their graphic design requirements, or turn it in even for bookmaking classes or drawing classes. And also writing. And I put everything I could into the story and still tried to glean everything I could from their classes and what they were hoping I would learn from their classes, but also satisfy my requirement of doing the work that I wanted to make. And it was from making that Kabuki book and it was being published while I was in college. That's where I got offers to do other things. In fact, I got my first offer it really stemmed from Joe Quesada reading Kabuki. That's really where I got the offer to write Daredevil from that. I met Joe Quesada in 1995, and I gave him at a convention a copy of the first Kabuki volume. And he called me the next week, and he's like, I read this book, I really like this. We should work together on something with you writing it and me doing the art. And a couple other things didn't work out, and eventually, in the late 90s, he called me and said, we're putting together, a few books in Marvel, which is going to be Marvel Knights. And asked me, that's eventually where it turned out for me to me writing Daredevil, starting as a writer at Marvel and Daredevil from Kabuki. But that's where the other things have come from too, like the work on Dexter and the work in just other variety of medium. You put everything you can into your own project, and it has like these ripple effects. I did Kabuki like 20 years ago, and there's still brand new people picking it up and reading it now.
Now, in terms of not just comics, you guys are what the Hollywood speak would be, multi-hyphenates. Writer, artist, producer, creator, painter, you wear many different hats in, your artistic lives. I'm sure a lot of people out here in the audience, some are writers, some are creators, some are painters, some might be sculptors. Do you have any words of maybe inspiration for them? Anything that you've learned, any kind of advice that you'd want to impart to people that they, may not have considered before?
I feel like everything is problem solving. When you're doing a story or a project, some people will ask me, why did you develop this kind of art style or this kind of look? And I never really think of it from that perspective. I always think of like the story first, and then once I have the story, I try to think of the best visual way to communicate that story. So I ask of myself as an artist the same thing I would ask as a writer. Is this story most powerfully told in first person or third person? Is it better to tell this? What order is it better to tell the story? What kind of voice should it be? What's the structure? And so I really essentially use the art as another tool of the writing and say, is a story best told in this medium or that medium or something else? And a lot of the times, all those solutions that I come to just come from trying several different things until something kind of works and I find is the best way for that particular character to be expressed and their character arc in the story. So I would tell people not to really try to develop just like one look or mark yourself one way, but every project keep yourself open to what are the epiphanies and the magic and the interesting things of that particular project that you can try to evoke the best way to communicate that project. And that often leads to some really interesting new ground, that you can. It's fun when the project surprises you, like when the story sort of reveals itself to you how it wants to be told, and you're kind of in collaboration with the characters. That's sort of the most magical feeling.
I would say one of the most important things that I think that people should keep in mind when they're breaking in, always, honestly, is like what do you want to do? Because I'll see a lot of people that are like, hey, I want to draw comics, but all the work they have to show is just, I talked a little about it yesterday, is just single characters, posed. And the thing is, like, do you really want to do comics? Because I feel like if you do, then you should already be laying out panels and telling stories. It's a visual storytelling medium, just like storyboards for a film. You're kind of a director. You're choosing camera shots. It's way more complicated than just drawing one guy posed on the page. And I feel like if you find that you're doing that a lot, there are a ton of other. You could be a concept artist. I mean, you can do like cover illustrations. I feel like sometimes people force themselves to go down a path that they think that's what they want, but they don't actually want it. And I would just say, think about what you really want, and then focus on that and become the best at it. If you want to do concept art, you got to do like vehicles, weapons. Are you going to be like more sci-fi or fantasy or both? Do you want to work in video games or movies? Because the styles are way different. You look at a lot of the Japanese RPGs versus like, you know, the artwork for Prometheus. You know, like my strength is not in that. I could never do concept art for a film like Prometheus, but I have a strength, you know, for doing comics and like stylized stuff like Darksiders, the video game that we worked on. But that's the stuff that I want to do, and I take a lot of effort to like become good at it. So I think that I think a lot of times a young artists struggle with their work, but it's like before you even put a pencil on the page, you're already like you're struggling internally. It's like, is that really what you want to do? So if it is, if you guys want to draw comics, start laying out pages. You know, start getting good at like perspective and like different camera angles. Like David said, it is a lot of problem solving. It's like, you know, like, okay, here's the sequence, you know, a train gets derailed and it goes through a store and there's like a baby in it and Spidey crashes through the window and it's like, okay, there's so many different ways that I could draw this. But like, what's the coolest? And sometimes you'll even have an idea and you'll call the writer and be like, hey, you know that scene where Wolverine stabs that dude? What if like the guy hits him first and then he like stabs him off panel and you see the blood, you know, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's cool. But I think it really has to come, it has to like be there already. Like you have to want to do it. So like, and it is a professional job. I mean, we kind of look like slackers, I know. I look like a punk kid that never grew up. I am, but
We're joking. We actually have the same uniform on.
yeah, we're actually wearing this is the official comic book artist uniform. Dark t-shirt and jeans. Nice.
Work it.
But you know, like, treat your portfolio with respect. You know, if you're showing your work at a show, don't have like pages falling out of it, or you know, like coffee stains on it. Like think about the impression that you're making. You know, if you're talking to CB or you're a scout, so you see all this stuff all the time. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like people will like, sometimes they'll apologize ahead of time, like, hey, this isn't my newest work, but it's from like a year ago, but I got so much better. Just stuff like that. It's like, just, you know, use some common sense, be professional, think about it like you're applying for a job, even if you're just showing your work to someone at a convention.
Well, to add to that, I would say, do the work that you want to do, that you want people to hire you for. Because people will hire you from what they see, what you do. That's what they'll ask you to do. So some people will show you something and say, well, I'm kind of doing this because I think this is what they want to see, but what I really want to do is this. And I would just say, like, you have nothing to lose just by going in and do that thing that you really want to do, you know, right from the beginning. I think some people think that comic book publishers like Marvel, they have a preconception that maybe there's a house style that they need to make it look like something else. But I think just from my experience, just the opposite is true. I think the publishers are always looking for a unique voice, something interesting and something different. And if you can find that one thing about you that is actually very different from anything else there that you see, I think that's really your edge, and that's what you should focus on.
And you talked about, you know, Frank Miller and Joe, you mentioned Art Adams, both being inspired by them, but I always like to say that there's a fine line between inspiration and imitation. And so everybody's inspired by someone, but if you go across that line into our imitation, we already have guys that draw like you. So you need to find your own original voice as an artist, no matter what medium you're working in. And my formative introduction, I started getting into comics with Brian Bendis. We started working in comics like in 1993 together, and we kind of had this philosophy that everybody has like 500 horrible pages in their system that they have to get out of their system before any good stuff happens, and you have to work through all of your influences. So you get a sense from people saying like, I'm thinking about this, I'm going to start, I'm going to wait till I start, till I get it just right. And the thing is, like, the first several comics you do aren't going to be very good. So you have to immediately get to work on those horrible comics to get them out of the way, so that you can work all that other nonsense out of your system on those to get to the good stuff. So I think like the most important thing is just jump in, you do it. There's no better way to find out how to do it than to just actually do it and fail, succeed, and learn from those. And then you know, once you've sort of got a lot of that behind you,
then you can like sort of find your own voice and find
We're going to take some questions from the audience now. We really can't see from up here, so is there runners with the microphones? All right, I see a couple people with their hands up, kind of. And how are we choosing who's going to get who has the best questions? Leslie, are you doing that? All right, whoever has the mic, there's a couple hands, so feel free to take the mic and ask away.
Hello, I got a question for Mr. STGCC. How is Agent Coulson still alive?
It's an Agent Coulson question. Is Agent Coulson still alive?
Is Agent Coulson still alive? Oh, sorry.
How is he still alive?
That's level 7 classified, so you're just going to have to try to get one of the tickets to the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. screening to find out for yourself.
Thank you.
I love that Agent Coulson is the most popular person here.
The question is for Joe. Joe, thanks for signing the comic. Hope you like the shirt. Okay, my question is this. Angela from Image Comic recently made the jump to the Marvel Universe. My question is, would you be open to Battle Chaser jumping to the Marvel Universe? And if so, who would you want the Battle Chasers to first interact with? Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, or what? Thank you.
That's a pretty good one. I think probably like Thor, like the Thor universe. Asgard would probably be the most logical one since it's already fantasy, and we could maybe pull it off without doing a whole cheesy like, hey, I'm in a portal that took me to New York City. What's happening? What's a taxi cab? I don't understand. That's a good question. I would have to think about it. Would I be open to it? I don't know. If I thought of a cool story where that would be like that would make sense, yeah, I'm open to anything. Honestly, like as long as it's like fun to work on, and I think that fans would be excited about it. But I think Marvel should put some of their characters in the Battle Chasers universe, not the other way around. I'll let them figure out that problem. No, that's kind of a cool idea. I hope I answered your question. You kind of threw me off there.
Okay,
all right.
as creative people, I'm sure that you all have encountered a creative block. What do you all do to overcome it?
Creative block? Is that for me? Or?
For both of you.
Okay.
You want to go first? Or?
Yeah. Now I just keep drawing. Like, I don't get stuck as much as I used to when I started. I do write sometimes, and as a writer, I'm not as confident, and when I get stuck, I'm stuck. I need to leave, go to the gym, work out, run around, and then take a shower, 3 showers, and then I'll go, oh, I have an idea. When I'm drawing, I just, a lot of times I'll start my day with, just having coffee and looking around the web. I'll go to DeviantArt or whatever and or read some manga or whatever it is just to get my juices flowing. And it usually keeps me unstuck, but I've been doing it so long now, if I'm stuck, I kind of know why, and I can kind of work through it, fortunately. But you just have to keep doing it. Like you said, get your 500 bad pages out of the way. At some point, you learn to avoid pitfalls. You won't draw things that you have trouble with. You just you have a lot of different ways to get around the problem.
Something you said was a really something I wanted to add on. Yeah, I don't even believe in blocks or getting stuck. I just believe it's all part of the cycle and the process. So some people think that when you're writing or when you're drawing, just 100% of that creative process is you actively typing or moving that pencil. But I think that's an aspect of it. But the other part of the cycle is going for a walk in between times, and everything you do that day. If you've been doing it long enough, and I've been doing kabuki for over 20 years, so I developed certain creative principles to keep me at my A game and to constantly keep me open to new inspirations. And I always want to be working at my optimum, maximum work efficiency and potential. So I developed certain principles to keep myself doing that. And one of the things, you sort of develop a rhythm every day that keeps you into the head zone that you want to be in. And I'm a big believer too in that, like a lot of cardiovascular exercise stimulates your brain and keeps you going too. So you write whatever you can think of at the moment, and you do some work on the page of what you can think of, and then as soon as you feel like you're not in 100% of your best capacity, you go for a walk, and then like your mind is such an amazing supercomputer. Every question you ask it, it'll find an answer for. So then when you're on that walk and you're just like walking around, stuff just starts coming to you. Stuff will come to me in a story when I'm walking that won't come to me when I'm sitting. Usually when I'm sitting and writing, that's when I'm writing down the thoughts that have already come to me. So, you go for a walk, you do some, push-ups in between things, you get something to eat, you do whatever you need to do. And while you're doing it, sometimes, like I just did that, I co-wrote that story, Daredevil End of Days, with Brian Bendis. And I was at Brian's place over Christmas, and he lives in Portland. It was raining all the time, and so I would wake up and immediately I was working on the script for the very last issue of that. I would wake up, write as much as I could of the script, and I would hit a point where I go, okay, it's not coming as quick as it should, and then I go, okay, it's time to get some coffee. We'll go outside, stretch my legs, get some coffee, then go for a walk. And as soon as I drink that coffee and then start walking, even while it was raining, I would just be walking, just getting all these ideas. So I would stay. It just felt like I thought, okay, that's enough. I'm gonna go back and write that. I would go, no, let's walk another block. Let's see if something else. And like the other page starts working itself out. So I would just keep walking in the rain for like 2 hours, until I was sure I got everything that was coming, while I was walking around. Then you go back and then you write it. Also, I would say this: a lot of interesting ideas that come to you, they might not all be perfect for the project you're working on at the time. Like a bad idea for your current project might be a great idea for a future project. So no idea is inherently bad, but when I'm working on one thing, say I'm working on a kabuki book, and I have all these ideas, and I think, okay, maybe half of those ideas are for this book, but I still want to write these other ideas that aren't quite right for this. So I developed a filing system where I have a big filing cabinet, and anytime I think of an idea, I just write it down. If I'm at a bar or a restaurant, write it on a napkin, write it anywhere. And I come back to this cabinet, and I have a file that is the title of that project. I put in my little piece of paper in that file, and I forget about it, and I work on what I'm working now. And eventually it'll come to, it might be years before I know, it's be 5 years before I can ever do this project. And then finally I come to that project, I open up this file, and there's 200 little pieces of paper that I have no memory of ever writing. And it's like, previous version of David really helped out current version of David by writing out all these notes on this piece of paper. And then I think, wow, there's a lot, whoever wrote this was really smart. This is really good stuff.
Okay, well, I think that's about it then. We have to end
That
here.
wasn't 10 questions.
It wasn't 10 questions, so.
You all win, yay!
Following this, we have another panel. It's called Marvel From Page to the Screen, so we'll continue the questioning there. If you'd like to stay, we have a great presentation. Court Lane is on his way out.